ladies and gentlemen. This year marks 10 years of Al-Qaeda's attacks on the most iconic landmarks in the United States. That is on September 11, 2001. 4 airplanes that were hijacked by Al-Qaeda aimed to destroy America's most iconic landmarks. And 2 of those aircrafts succeeded in attacking the North Tower and the South Tower of the World Trade Center. America's most iconic economic landmark was destroyed. In fact, those twin towers were reduced to dust and to rubble. The second plane attacked America's Department of Defense, or the Pentagon. There were a number of fatalities and casualties. The 4th plane planned to attack the US Congress. Many speculated that the 4th plane was heading for the White House, but it was not, based on debriefings of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11. We now know that the 4th plane aimed to hit the Capitol Hill, the US Congress, because Al-Qaeda itself faced difficulties of visibility. The White House, there are a lot of trees covering the White House from the sky. It was difficult for Al-Qaeda to observe their target. So they aimed to hit Congress that was in session. Let me share with you a little bit about the minds of those perpetrators. There were a total of 19 hijackers and musclemen. The operation itself was led by a Pakistani Kuwaiti called Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was very well educated. He grew up in Kuwait. He was of Pakistani and Kuwaiti heritage. And he studied in the United States. He went to the Agriculture and Technical University in Greensboro in North Carolina. He graduated as a mechanical engineer. But he harbored a very deep resentment and hatred against the United States. He wanted to take revenge from the United States because he believed that Muslims were attacked and that Islam was being attacked. And his way of taking revenge was to attack the United States. His own nephew, Ramzi Ahmad Yusuf, in 1993, February, went to the United States and nearly toppled one tower of the World Trade Center on the other. His nephew, Ramzi Ahmad Yusuf, placed a bomb in the basement of one of those towers. He was not successful in that attack. The intention of the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi Ahmad Yusuf, was to kill 125,000 people. But subsequently, Ramzi Ahmad Yusuf was arrested in Pakistan. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed continued that journey, and his plan succeeded. And that was to target America's most iconic economic landmark, America's most iconic military landmark, and America's most iconic political landmark with aircrafts laden with fuel. So you can see that vengeance, that hatred, that resentment manifested in the form of terrorism. So the contemporary wave of terrorism that we are seeing today began on September 11th. Not that there was no terrorism before. Certainly there was. But this wave of terrorism of using preponderant use of suicide attacks where people were willing to die, that very ideology, that very belief system was crafted just before that, but it became a global phenomenon. So we had even terrorists in Singapore who were willing to go and commit suicide attacks because they believe in a specific ideology. And I want to share that ideology that forms a part of the mindset of the contemporary terrorists. These terrorists were made to believe by their mentors, by their ideologues, by their operational leaders, that if you do a suicide attack, if you are willing to sacrifice yourself, you will get 5 things. One is that you will enter paradise, meaning that you can go to heaven. So it was in many ways a shortcut to heaven, because all of you can go to heaven, but you have to do good things. But Al-Qaeda and the groups associated with Al-Qaeda said that if you do a suicide attack, if you sacrifice your life on earth, you will go to heaven. And number 2 is that you will meet God. The Arabic word for God is Allah. You can meet Allah. And the third is that you will be forgiven for your vices and sins. And many of the youth who were exposed to that ideology, especially those youth in the conflict zones, they believed in that belief. Because as youth, we all commit vices and sins. And this was an easy way to cleanse yourself. So a terrorist ideologue in Australia, Bilal Kaza, he wrote a terrorist training manual and he put it on the internet. So the youth who visited that manual, they saw that if you have committed sins and vices, one way of cleansing yourself is to go and do those attacks. Otherwise you will burn in hell. The 4th attraction to doing suicide attacks was Shafan. Shafan is you can take 70 relatives to heaven. And the 5th was, the terrorist ideologue said, you can have 72 beautiful girls in heaven. But these girls are different from the girls here. That is, they said that in heaven you don't become old. You stay young every day. You're not going to get wrinkles. You're not going to get white hair. Okay? And not only that, to attract young Muslim boys to join this terrorist movement, Al-Qaeda ideologues invented something. They said that these girls are extraordinarily pretty and beautiful, and you can live in heaven forever. So if you go to heaven, it is eternity. So such misinterpretation of religion we saw after 9/11. And Al-Qaeda was successful because Al-Qaeda used Afghanistan to train 30 to 40 different terrorist groups in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East. There were also a few hundred terrorists that came from Europe and trained on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. So then began the contemporary wave of terrorism. This wave of terrorism started with 9/11. But we saw attacks in Madrid where the terrorists planned to hit 4 trains. Only 1 train exploded, and their plan was when the 4 trains reach the ATOC, the Madrid main station, there will be explosion and the roof of the station will come down and it will kill over 1,000 people. But fortunately, the Spanish trains are always late. So the trains didn't make it to the central station in time. So the roof of the station didn't come down. Then we saw Bali, 202 people killed, 12th of October, year 2002. 88 of them were Australians. Again, a mass fatality and a mass casualty attacks. And these attacks were very symbolic. They inspired and instigated others to follow in the footsteps of Al-Qaeda. Although they themselves could not hijack planes, the associated groups of Al-Qaeda such as Jamaah Islamiyah in Indonesia, in Singapore, in Malaysia, southern Thailand, such as the Abu Sayyaf group in the Philippines, such as the Kumpulan Militan Malaysia in Malaysia. These groups emulated, started to copycat Al-Qaeda. They themselves, the members and the leaders of these groups, they want to sacrifice their life because they believe in that ideology, that ideal, that ideation that if we follow in the footsteps of Al-Qaeda, sacrifice our lives, we can go to heaven and have a better life. Let me share with you a little bit the mentality of Muhammad Atta. He was an Egyptian. He was the first pilot who crashed his plane to the World Trade Center. This particular terrorist leader came from a very wealthy family in Egypt, very influential family. Father was a lawyer and he was studying for his PhD in architecture in Germany. He was not a fool, but he himself had been indoctrinated. He himself believed that he must do this, he must sacrifice his life. And he carried with him an attack plan that said, C stands for cockpit, P stands for plane, and A stands for airport. What he must do when he is in A, which is the airport, when he is in the cabin of the plane, and what he must do when he is in the cockpit. The instructions were very clear. And according to those instructions, he performed. He took with him a knife, because during that time there was a standard specification that the TSA regulations, the Transport Administration regulations, was such that you could take a knife of this proportion. He managed to smuggle it into the aircraft, used that knife to kill a stewardess, and subsequently killed the pilot of the aircraft, took control of the airplane with the help of his team. And as his aircraft was reaching the World Trade Center, he believed that upon impact, upon his aircraft hitting the World Trade Center, he's going to have an audience with God. The instructions that were written were subsequently recovered because Muhammad Atta's luggage did not travel from the Boston, the Logan airport when he transited, because the connection time was very short. And these instructions were retranslated by our analyst at the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in Singapore. So these instructions very clearly showed the mindset of these terrorists. And let me go back and share with you that this is an evolving mindset. In a debriefing that I did with the Indonesian terrorists, I asked this terrorist called Al-Haidar, I asked him, how if a female does a suicide attack? What is it that the female is going to get in heaven? And this terrorist told me, oh, after the suicide attack, during the process of the suicide attacker reaching heaven, the transmigration phase, the suicide attacker will transform into a male. So I want to share with you that it is such myths, such inventions, such creations that have shaped the ideology of the contemporary wave of terrorism. There is nothing in the Quran that says that if you go and do a suicide attack, that you are going to end up in heaven. So you can see there is a lot of misinterpretation, misrepresentation of religion when it comes to the contemporary wave of terrorism. And it is not only Islam that is being misinterpreted. I can give you an example from my own travels and my own interviews in Indonesia with terrorists. I interviewed a female terrorist leader, and she belonged to a terrorist organization called Brigade Kupu Kupu. Kupu Kupu means what? butterfly. She belonged to the brigade of the butterflies. And this is the women's wing of a terrorist group called Lashkar Christus. Lashkar means the warriors, the fighters. Christus means Christ. The warriors of Christ. The women's wing is called Brigati Kupu Kupu. When I interviewed this woman, she acknowledged to me that they were Christian terrorists, meaning they were driven by the extremist misinterpretation, misrepresentation of Christianity. And they went and they butchered Muslim villages in the conflict zones of Poso and in Morocco. So it is not only Muslim terrorists, but there were also Christian terrorists that went and committed atrocities. For instance, members of Brigati Kupu Kupu will go at night and they will surround the village. They will carry spears. They will carry shotguns. They will carry torches. They will set fire to the village, kill men, women, children. It is not only Christianity and Islam that has been misinterpreted, misrepresented by these politically driven groups, but we have also seen that Buddhism, which is one of the most non-violent religions, it has also been misinterpreted. For instance, there's a terrorist group in Japan called Om Shinrikyo. This group is today a mainstream registered organization. But in 1994, this group conducted a terrorist attack where they used sarin. This group hired some of the best scientists from Tokyo University and other universities. They developed anthrax. They developed a number of chemical and biological agents. They used sarin in the Tokyo subway, killed a very significant number of people. About 5,000 people were admitted to hospital. A very small number of them were actually suffering injuries. But the Japanese were very worried. Again, a misinterpretation of Buddhist ideology. In India, we have a terrorist group, an extremist group called RSS that attacked the Muslims. In Israel, we have a Jewish terrorist group called the Kahane group. Mia Kahane was the leader of that group. Again, they misinterpreted the Judaic preachings. I want to share with you that every religion every major religion has been misinterpreted. I'll give you just one faith. The Sikh religion, again a very non-violent religion. When I did research on the Sikhs, I was in Canada, in Vancouver, and I visited the Sikh temples called the Gurdwaras. And in those temples, they're very kind. They will always invite you to a meal, give you free food, tell them about their ideology. But even the Sikh faith, there's a very small, a tiny group that went towards extremism. They formed their own terrorist group called the Babar Khalsa International, the BKI. And the worst attack of aviation terrorism until 9/11 was conducted by BKI. They blew up a plane of 300 passengers of the United Kingdom. The plane originated in Canada. So let me make a few concluding remarks. That the contemporary wave of terrorism is driven by misinterpretation of religious ideology. The earlier wave of terrorism was largely driven by left-wing and right-wing ideologies, and also by ethno-nationalism, extreme interpretation of one's nationality. We saw during that wave of politico-ethno-nationalism, we saw the emergence of groups such as the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, the Tamil Tigers, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil, ETA, the Spanish terrorists. Then we saw the left-wing terrorist groups such as the Red Army faction in Germany, the Red Brigades or the Rosa Brigati in Italy, the Action Direct in France, the Communist Combatant Cells in Belgium, the Japanese Red Army in Japan, the New People's Army in the Philippines. So the left-wing terrorist groups. So today, starting with the left-wing terrorists, with the ethno-nationalist groups, we have seen the emergence of the politico-religious terrorist groups. So I want to share with you that we are living today in a period where there are momentous changes globally in the Middle East. Middle East is where the first significant terrorist attacks originated in the 1960s and the 1970s with the emergence of Palestinian nationalism, Lebanese groups. But today the epicenter of international terrorism has shifted back to, Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And with the revolution in the Middle East, it is very likely we will see another wave of extremism and terrorism in the Middle East. So terrorism has emerged as the tier 1 national security threat. But certainly there are other national security threats such as fissile and missile proliferation, piracy, criminality, organized crime. But I want to share with you that terrorism remains the most pressing and the most significant contemporary national security threat. And it is a threat that we have to respond to. And one very important aspect of fighting terrorism is to counter the belief system of the terrorists. It is not only kinetically fighting them, not only lethally fighting them, not only catch, kill and disruption of terrorist plans, preparations, but it is to counter the belief of the terrorists. So for this we have to bring mainstream ideologues, mainstream leaders, and ask them to immunize the community so that the community will be protected from these extremist misinterpretations and misrepresentations that are disseminated not only in the real world, one-to-one, but through the internet. So the internet has become today the principal means of communicating this vicious ideology. And I ask all of you to play a role to reduce the global threat of terrorism. I thank you very much.